te pute more te weu te ake te rā. Ko te wanui te kune te whete kore te pō. Ki ngā tangata Māori arangi ko rawa ko papa. Ko tēnei te timatanga o te ao. Ko tēnei te timatanga o te ao. Tuhi ki te rangi, tuhi ki te whenua, tuhi ki te ngako ngā tangata. Ia te mea nui te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. Ia te mea nui o te ao huri huri ko te aroha tihei Māori ora. Ngā mi nui ki a koutou, kia ora koutou katoa. Mō tō tautoko mō tēnei kaupapa whakahirihira mō tātou tangata o Aotearoa. O tēnei motu, o tēnei whenua, o tangata whenua, mana whenua, tangata moana nui a kiwa. Ko pira tuku ingoa. Just want to say greetings. The waiata I just sang is the creation story in Te Ao Māori. As you can see on the slide here, it begins with a root, with a seed. And as the Christian story unravels, we slowly see that plant go from seed to roots to vine to prosperity to blossoms, but eventually has to go back to a place where, you know, there's nothingness or darkness, and that is the cycle. And when we jump into the space to talk about civics education, one of the things that both Melissa and I want to encourage each of us to think about is, where are we starting? What is our creation point? What is our starting point when we think about civics education? Are we thinking about civics in regards to passports, civics in regards to voting, or are we thinking about civics engagement in regards to how we engage in the wider world, into our hurihuri, the changing world, with our whānau and all the other members of our whānui hapori? So I just wanted to sing this waiata, especially because I think it's a beautiful story that sometimes we forget in the noisy world that we live in. And so as we go through the session today, I wanted to just express that this is just a starting point. We're going to be introducing a few different building blocks around civics education and the space that we hold. And in no way are we the full experts of everything. We're just here to sort of give our views and our experiences. And we hope that you can take something from that. But also that we're grounding this within Te Ao a Māori and Te Ao Tangata Pasifika, because that is our lived experience. So as we go through today, this is usually the session's about 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Today we have a bit shorter, but we're going to try and give you the richness that we have learned over the years as we've gone on our own journey. So I'll just hand it back to our whānau, to Melissa.
Kia ora tātou katoa, bula vanaka, malolele, ko kingoa ko Melissa Lama. Nei whaelei au I Tamakimo Kauro, I Okalani, ka ko tupuhake I Otautahi Christchurch. Kai taimini o ko nofo I Otipoti Dunedin ke whakua ko. O glele mā ko ngō mātu a me tonga, pa ko whiwhia tau heni ka atoa ke whahatala noa ki civics education e he ahoni. Malo. We thought that we would start by introducing ourselves in the way that we do to, I guess, signify our connections to land, to people and the surroundings that we're in. So this was just me introducing myself, letting you know where my land is, which I was born here as first generation Tongan in my family, and both my parents are born back in Tonga and have lived here to obviously ensure that I get a future, but also get to walk in these two worlds of Western and Tongan culture. But I'll pass it on to Ali Malo.
Talofa lava, alo ingo Ali Leota, o te sau mai Polilua, o lo tama o Sam Leota, o te sau mai Mulifungoa, a Pulimuta, Malatongo, lo tina o Kima Fasa Lele, o te sau mai Nofuali, uso o Baker, Wesley Millenniuma, o Royal Mawhaitasi, o lo tuafifina o Emalita, o lo o Victoria Nofuainga, whawhtai tele mo le awanoa. So talofa everyone and warm Pacific greetings. So I just highlighted again, so as we do in PPR, and as Melissa highlighted, I just shared about myself from Porirua, and I highlighted the villages that my father comes from, the villages my mother comes from, and then my siblings as well as my fiance. So, and that's very similar to the PPR as well. So that's how we introduce ourselves in Samoa, and we coined it as the Furuwanga. So.
Kia ora again. Ko korokoro te maunga, te awa kārangi, te awa Ngāti Hamo, te iwi, whariula me vai longa hapu, ko Peter Topingo, Salofa Lava, olo ingo Peter, so whangau ngei, Misila, ai olo umātua sa whangau i Samoa, lo tina mai le nuu whariula, ma lo tima le nuu vai loa whaliata. So again, I'm sharing my story, my pipiha. And the reason why we're going through this very carefully right now is because in regards to engaging with each other, in Te Ao Māori, the pepeha is that place of connection. It is that place of storytelling. The pepeha and whakatauki identifies to all other people, who are you? And so that question, who am I, is told through a story. It's not I get into a space and I talk about I'm the chief executive of this organization, or I have this qualification, or I have actually, when Māori get into a space and they're meeting each other for the first time, the way they connect to each other is actually by talking about the geographic spaces that their families existed in, the different rivers that bordered the places that they gained food from. They talk about even sometimes I've heard in Pepeha, they talk about the ferocity of the winds that they might be from, and people sort of pick for, well, they must be coming from Whanganui-a-Tara or even further down south, or how cold the climate is. And so often you will find on marae, through the pōwhiri process, when the whai kōrero stands and speaks, that they actually start by sharing the geographic locations of their whānau and whakatauki or quotes and proverbs that came from that whānau. And there's no mention yet of names. It's just an illustration of different places and spaces that their whānau have been in. And so Melissa, myself, and Ali, in just the last few minutes, have shared our villages, the places that we grew up in. I use korokoro as my maunga, which is a maunga in Pitoone, which is where I'm at right now, not a maunga in Samoa. And that's because I haven't been to Samoa. And when I spoke to Kaumātua about my journey, and I asked them, okay, what do you mean by maunga? They said, well, where did you play when you were a kid? What did you see when you left the front door of your house? What was the spaces that you engaged in? Because if those are the places that you see as your home and they've molded you, then that is your identity. And then when you do choose to go back to Samoa with your family and you get to see those spaces, then you can take, you know, that mountain, or you can take that river and say that that's yours as well. And the beauty of the pepeha is there's no strict rule about who you are. There's no strict rule about what you claim and what you choose, because actually it's your story. And so for me, I didn't want to take a mountain from Samoa that I'd never seen, because to me that was being a thief, because I haven't actually gone there and experienced the shadow of that mountain, or seen felt the chilling waters of any rivers. And what I do know is Te Awa Kairangi, which is just a kilometer or so away from my house, and that's the river that I swam in. And so I went to my mana whenua and I asked them about it, and they said, you know what, if this is the whenua that you've known, then feel free to use that in your whakatauki, in your pepeha. So what is the pepeha? Pepeha is an exclamation and expression of your identity. It's your story through the air that you breathe out of your lungs. Because to breathe that story out of your lungs, you actually need to breathe in that air from where you came from. So when you're in that mountain, in the river with your family, you were breathing in all of that identity. And so when we talk about pepeha, you're expressing all of that when you speak. It positions yourself within a constellation of people. You know, we hear a lot about how we navigated the oceans through the stars in the skies, but we forget too that actually there are stars amongst us, in our mātua tipuna and our kaumātua, they are also stars. And so we are part of that constellation, firmly grounded in this gigantic universe through the people that we're connected to, whether they be our mums and dads, our cousins, or our friends. It illustrates our genealogy. You know, when I love when people get up and share whakatauki and they share proverbs, because those wise words were spoken by a tohunga, or they were spoken by an orator previously. And in Samoa, Tonga, in Aotearoa, we share that often when a matai will speak or a tula fale would speak, they'd be speaking from a place of proverbs that were actually spoken by someone 3-4 generations ago. And when they speak that whakatauki, other people that hear that whakatauki in a room are like, whoa, that's the grandson of so-and-so, because that's the only way they would have known that story. And it's also the contents of our history. So when we share our pepeha and our whakatauki, these are stories that we have gained from millennia. It's not a story that we heard 50 years ago. Actually, some people in whai kōrero that I've heard have been able to go all the way back to Hawaii with their pepeha, talking about the different winds that guided their waka, talking about the different seas or currents that they journeyed in. And so when we share our pepeha, when we share our identity, it's not just a matter of, hey, this is my mountain, this is my ocean, and this is my name. Actually, when done with true, genuine intent, it actually connects that one individual that's speaking to the entire world that their whānau and they have actually come from. And so it is actually the original Google Maps. If we think about it, the pepeha and the whakatauki is actually the Google Maps for our people. And so when before in days gone by, when people were confused about where they came from or where they were going, all they needed to do was look up their whakapapa through their pepeha, and they found themselves regrounded. And I think this is one of the issues that our people are facing now when we talk about navigating new systems and navigating spaces. And Melissa will go a bit further in this, is that how do you connect to a Google Maps if that Google Maps no longer exists? And so as we talk through, you see these 3 photos, Ototahi, Poredoa, the Hutt Valley. These are parts of our identity, and you can see the mountains and the awa, and that those are our experiences. And so
one thing we wanted to do in this session before we even think about civics and citizenship is we wanted you to think about what happens when your stories and your genealogy and your knowledge and your true access to your culture and identity is taken away. And I guess one thing that we can think of in relation to New Zealand is the history surrounding colonization. And so we wanted to mention this as something for us to consider, because it's true. It's something that happened for tangata whenua. It's something that happened in Aotearoa. And so before we dive into what citizenship means for you, we think it's a good time for us to reflect, put ourselves in a position where we're able to do some, I guess, self-awareness and groundwork around things that we consider before we go into discussions around systems and ways in which we can partake in them. And so another thing I really wanted to talk about was, how do we exist in these spaces when we don't have, the rights to be able to carry your culture in all spaces, when you don't have the right to speak your language and be understood in all spaces. And so leading on from this, Peter, is that we're going to go through to what citizenship means to you in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and more regional, national concepts.
Just before we continue, Mel, the conversation around the global GPS and, going back to that Google Maps. And in their previous slide, what happens if all of those things are removed? And I think it's not just about our histories as tangata whenua or tangata Pasifika. Let's think about the global displacement of people that's happening right now in regards to refugees having to cross borders, in regards to people that were taken from their lands generations ago to come to these lands to work the land. The conversation around identity and civic engagement, it actually affects everybody. And I think Mato Roger pointed that out. There are some conversations that need to be had about how people participate, because it's not just those of us that have been colonized. Even the colonizer doesn't know its identity sometimes. And so this conversation about where do we connect is actually very massive. And it's why we wanted to start off with our pepeha, to express how important identity is to civics education. But we'll jump into so that was the local sort of understanding of civics. Local understanding of civics is connection to your local whenua, your local people. But when we move to sort of a national level, the conversation now becomes, like Melissa was saying, what is citizenship to us on a national level? And I'll quickly give an example of what national citizenship has been for some peoples in the world. back in the Roman Empire, citizenship meant that those that were Roman had greater access to resources and had greater privileges. And actually, many historians believe that the official formal process of citizenship actually began in Rome when the empire gave its people certain rights, and then those that they conquered didn't have those rights. And it became quite obvious to see who was a Roman citizen and who wasn't based on the way they were able to navigate the law, navigate the system. If they committed certain crimes, citizens would get one punishment, non-citizens would get a different punishment. When it came to provision of welfare, certain citizens got one resource space, and non-citizens got a different resource space. And that sort of tracked all the way to present day. We still see sort of citizenship in that way, in that if you are a citizen of a nation, you get access to that nation's resources. But I'll hand it over to Melissa to have to take that conversation a bit further.
So when we are discussing national citizenship in Aotearoa, what's your understanding around citizenship and I guess your rights, or the way you partake in citizenship? So what I'll do, if you do have a piece of paper next to you, or you can just think about it, I'll give you about a minute to think about the things that you consider citizenship or in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So if you want to jot down some ideas, and we will discuss it as a group. Malo.
Just to quickly recap, we had that conversation, and these are the questions that we ask ourselves. So when stories are lost, when genealogy is disrupted, when land is confiscated, when knowledge fades, how do we answer these questions? And if we can't answer these questions, how do we participate in a civic process? How do we participate collectively if we don't know ourselves individually? And so the pepeha then becomes ha, because you're breathing something out, but you don't know what actually came in, or you don't know where you come from. So what stories can you breathe out? And as Melissa was saying, we went from local citizenship to national citizenship. So when we think about this country, actually pre-colonization or pre-settlers, any type of settlers, there was already a process in play for people to engage. They had tikanga, they had kawa, they had the law as an LORE, they had their stories. They knew how to engage with each other, iwi to iwi, hapu to iwi, whānau to hapu. And then there's Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And in the beauty of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, there was an expression between two peoples around how they would be citizens in one country. And so we have the new law, LAW, how we participate in this country when we come from different backgrounds. But not to take up too much time, I want to ask that question that Melissa asked. When we think about citizenship, where do we jump to, like immediately in our minds? When we think about civics, educational citizenship, where do we go to? And in previous groups, people said passports. We had a group of young people say, it's your passport. That's citizenship. Because when you have your passport, that says where you're from and where you can go to. Other people said it's the benefit, the ability to access resources of the country when you need it. But just one more thing around national citizenship. This has changed quite drastically in the last 50 years. So what we know of national identity and national entity has actually shifted quite massively. And what Mato Roger was sharing was around how democracy has changed. And so there's a whole lot of layers of conversations that are happening and challenges that are being presented. But we personally believe, both Melissa and I, that's because we haven't been able to answer the question around who we are as an individual within our own people. And if you don't have that story, it's impossible to answer the big, universal, global, national issues of how do we get people to participate collectively and civically. The number of items you are wearing from other countries. And so just have a think about that. Where are your pants from? Obviously they came from your drawers, but before they were in your drawers, what country were they made in? What perfume are you wearing? And where was that made? Maybe your glasses, I'm right now, I'm wearing a t-shirt that was designed here, but the t-shirt itself that we got printed onto actually comes from China. And we know that China is a major manufacturer for many items. And so a lot of the clothes that we wear would come from Asia or Africa. but a lot of the design labels actually come from America or Europe. So those are closed, but if you just take a quick look around your room while you're sitting there, where did your computer come from? You know, maybe the lamppost that's on next to your bed, the phone that's in your hand. Think about maybe if you're a gamer, where did the PlayStation come from? Where did the Xbox come from? Where was your TV made? On your desk, where did the pens get made? As you sit in your room right now, how many items are you looking at didn't come from or were made in Aotearoa? And if we go a bit further, those of us that like to shower in the morning, where did our shampoos come from? Our conditioners. Those of us that use makeup, where did those products come from? If you had a bowl of cornflakes this morning or Wheat Bix, where was that made? Last night when you had rice or potatoes, where were those growing? And so if we go through this conversation and we're answering these questions one by one, what we find is actually a lot of what we use and a lot of what we wear and a lot of what we think about aren't actually from our local or national civic spaces. They are actually from places thousands and thousands of miles away. And so every single day that you wake up and you engage in your room or at your work or in your community, you are actually using resources made and produced in a totally different country. So in fact, we are not just local and national citizens, we are global citizens now. There was a time less than 100 years ago where the majority of things that we use on a daily basis would have been made in our countries. And what we've found with COVID is that actually everything that we do now is so dependent on the global economy and the global space that when things like pandemics arise, it's very quick for those processes and those systems to break down. And so we've thought about our pepeha at in our local identity. We've thought about our national, civic and citizenship. But have we ever considered how actually today we are global citizens? And as global citizens, every single day we are making choices that impact immediately on other people. And in a beautiful sense, we are a global community. We are that tribe of the four winds. We are a one human race. But the other side of this is we don't always consider our responsibility to other people that we do not see. At a local space, in regards to civic engagement, we see our whānau, we see our hapori whānui, we see our whenua. At a national level, we can have conversations about how to deal with COVID. We can have a conversation about what needs to be done at different levels and stages for Auckland and for Christchurch and for Wellington. We know what we need to do as voters. But one area that we don't consider, and actually we impact every day now because we're using those resources, is how we participating as global citizens in that tribe of the four winds. And so I don't think any of us can answer that we don't use resources from elsewhere unless you're fully off the grid. And if you are fully off the grid, you probably wouldn't be in this Zoom. But and at the same time, if you're off the grid, we congratulate you because that is the way we want to go in regards to using resources responsibly. But those three levels of civic engagement, those all come back to you personally as an individual. And going back to the conversation about pepeha, if that space in regards to your personal identity, your connection to your people, your connection to your stories, your connection to your language isn't solid, then it's very difficult to participate in the other two. And so when we talk about civic engagement and civic education, what we're actually talking about is education about yourself, education about your connection to your own story. Because for the rest to happen, you need to be critically aware of your own identity and how you can participate in the systems around you. The more we become aware of our impact on spaces outside of our physical engagement, I hope people become more conscious of that decision. Citizenship has now, sadly, as we moved away from that sort of local identity and connection to our stories has become just existence in a space. And so you can have a passport, but do you feel connected to your country? Do you feel connected to your community? Do you feel like you actually participate? You can have a, a certificate or qualification from a university, but are you part of that university? Are you part of that community? And so ownership, I think that speaks loudly to all of us, and that actually more and more now with the pandemic, we've had to become more active. We've had to own our choices, we've had to own our decisions, and we've had to recognize actually the responsibility is ours in regards to the spaces we engage in. And definitely this is the whakaaro and kōrero for tangata whenua in regards to Te Tiriti o Waitangi was about acknowledging mana motuhake, and that they had the right to stand on their own land. But when you confiscate land and you remove ownership, why are we asking questions about whether Māori and Pacific engage? We remove their ability to own their stories and own their land. And again, it's not like for our local and national experience is tangata whenua and tangata moana nui kiwa. But what we're actually seeing on a global level, and a global scale, is people's ownership of their lives being removed. And so we see the rise of authoritarian governments taking away choices and rights. We see nations in war removing the rights of children to safety and education and care. And that's actually the conversation we wanted to start now. As when we talk about the world, we know that there are these international treaties, the United Nations Convention of the Right of the Child, human rights, the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We're talking about the Sustainable Development Goals. These are international global conversations about civic engagement, about citizenship, but those aren't activated unless we can answer the issue that's happening locally. And so on a global level, we need to be thinking, but on a local level, that's where we act. And so are our people, Māori and Pacific, and all others within like Ngāho Whā in this country, given the power to act locally? Are they given the power to know their local stories? And so while we may have these international treaties that do exist, that story is almost impossible to realize. That dream is impossible to realize until we acknowledge mana motuhake, until we acknowledge tino rangatiratanga. The Te Tiriti o Waitangi is the gateway to the international treaty. And unless we get through that gate first, it's very difficult to go any further. I'm a youth worker, and I love to engage through activity. And so we're going to use one of the games that we know. But again, this workshop's meant to give different resources, and some of the resources mātauranga in regards to the conversation we're having. Other resources is the actual activities that we use. And so this is one of the activities that you can use if you're engaging with tamariki, rangatahi, whānau, to start having a conversation about what civics education is, and why it's important to participate. I worked at the local council for 5 years, and so we had what we call the long-term plan process, where every 3 years we would go out to community and would ask them to tell us about their community. We had a very strict sort of process. You write a submission, and then you go in and you sit in front of the council and you share your views, and then the council makes big budget decisions about what's going to happen in the community. And that was my understanding of what civics engagement was. And as I've journeyed with Aotearoa and the different practitioners in the spaces, I've taken on this understanding, and this is why we feel this kōrero is important, because actually that process is just a system. It exists, and people participate in. But the reason why people choose to participate actually comes from the confidence of knowing who you are. And so if you don't know who you are, you feel like you can't share. And so I know there might be people in the room who feel like, well, actually, I don't know if I can share this because it might not make any difference or might not be useful. But actually, civic engagement and education is the relationship between people who feel safe enough to share their worldview and to share what they're feeling and experiencing. Because if we can inform each other on an individual one-on-one basis or within small groups, ultimately, that's the movement towards system change at the local and national level. And so I encourage people who are in the room, like you might have a thought in mind, or you might be thinking about, okay, this is what I've experienced, or this is what I'm thinking. But ultimately, civic engagement is people feeling confident about who they are and sharing what's in their pepeha, which is the expression of your experience. And so, another definition of pepeha is the indulgence of self. And I love that because pepeha actually means to share of who you are with other people, your ahua, your wairua. The more you know yourself, the more empathetic you are to others. And the more you're confident in who you are, the less you need to feel like you need to just whakaiti or diminish others' mana to participate in this in the process. And I totally hear that. Like it changes who we are when we know who we are. But it also means that we feel a lot more confident to advocate for ourselves. But like when you know who you are, you also become more confident in the advocacy process, that actually other people don't have the right to choose your identity. And for those of us who have experienced ongoing oppression, or our stories have been taken, that's why we don't feel confident to participate, because like we don't know who we are, and we don't know how to express our identity into an alien process. So I'm gonna play our game because we're running a bit out of time, but grab your piece of paper and I'll quickly explain the game. The game is called Scribble. And on your piece of paper, what's going to happen is I'm going to give you an image like this. And this is just an example, an image like this. So you'll draw that on your piece of paper. And then I'll give you 30 seconds. We'll make it less time, 20 seconds. And for artists, this is going to be awesome. I'm real bad at art, and you're going to see this because I drew these. And you're going to take this picture, and you're going to turn it into another image. So I took the original picture and I turned it into this snail with a smile. I turned it into this monster. Yep, this monster. And then I turned it into the beehive. I'm real bad at art. I actually tried to do a beehive once with kids and they thought it was a cake. So that's why I added the buildings in the background so that you can see it's definitely a building. Or you can turn it into a treasure chest that's inside a cave. So I'm going to give you an image and you get 20 seconds to 30 seconds to take that image and turn it into something else. And so the first image is this. So draw this on your piece of paper. And then what you have to do is take this image and turn it into something else. Take this picture, draw it onto your piece of paper, and then add to it to create another image. Awesome. We'll do our last picture. So if you got another piece of paper, here's your new picture. So you take this scribble and you turn it into something else. I'm going to just ask a few questions, and this is just for your own thinking as we talk. When you were born, how many of us got to choose whether we were male or female? When you were born, how many of us got to choose the color of our hair and the color of our eyes, or the color of our skin, our ethnicity, our culture, the language that we were introduced to? When you were born, how many of us got to choose our parents, mom or dad? How many of us got to choose our siblings? I'm one of 6, so I've got 5 siblings. I didn't get to choose any of them. I love all of them, but I didn't get to choose any of them. How many of us got to choose the land we grew up in? What maunga, what river, whether our family had wealth or no wealth? How many of us even got to choose whether we were born in Aotearoa? And the answer to many of these questions is we don't get to choose that. We don't get to choose the start, the genesis. And when we go back to the creation waiata that we sang right in the beginning, we don't actually get to choose what that first seed is. And it's very similar to this activity in that you didn't get to choose the scribble, but you get the ability to transform the scribble into something else. So you might have the pen and you might have ideas. If you're creative, if you've got like really good sense of space on the piece of paper, you have the ability to change what's given to you, but you don't get to choose what you start with. And in life, that's actually the reality. And we do this activity with kids to talk about well-being and talk about their pepeha. In the beginning, you don't get to choose the scribble, but you do get to choose what the scribble turns into. And civic education is actually that process. How do you use the systems and the resources around you? How do you participate in the conversations about you and the conversations about your family and the conversations about your country to transform the picture that you start with into something else? And so for many of us, we start on our whenua. The scribble is a beautiful scribble. We have a beautiful start, and we participate there, and we grow there, and we move in it. But for some people, that picture is totally different. And the scribble might be a lot more difficult, or they don't have the resources or the support. And like Melissa, you can jump in at any time in the conversation around the scribble, but that's what civic education is in regards to knowing your pepeha, knowing your scribble, and being supported to change that into something else, and using the different processes and systems around you to do that.
It's also another analogy I like to add to what Peter has is, you know, the thought to the piece of paper that you get to write on, right? Some of us get a massive A3 piece of paper, and some of us get a little Post-it note. And often when you get a little Post-it note, but you have so much you want to do, and you have so much that you want to, you know, you want to enhance your initial scribble, you have to be you have to navigate in some way, and often that involves talking to people, and often that involves, you know, consultations and holding huis and whanos, so that you're able to figure out the best way forward, so that you can get the most out of that little Post-it note or that little piece of paper that you have, to ensure that when you get to wherever you need to be, you know, the papers that are available to you and your community is an A3, you know, that whatever you produce is going to be taken seriously, is going to be acknowledged, and is going to be valued. So again, just to usher what we're trying to do here is just to say to you that, you know, it's great that we have systems that we're able to participate in, to bring redress, to bring our voice to the table, to hopefully, you know, lobby and influence the government. But even before doing that, there's a lot of groundwork that needs to happen first. There's a lot of understanding that needs to happen first. And there's definitely a lot of engagement that needs to happen first.
We just wanted to quickly just go through the session. And the reality of this session is we called it Le Moana Koi Whanua Te Tangata, because it is about the story of Māori and Pacifica in regards to civic education. And one thing I want to express really clearly is that civics education didn't start with Te Riti o Waitangi. It goes back millennia. We have had many different systems over the eons that have helped us participate and collectively build our communities. And in Tonga, they have Tauhiwa, which is the relationship that people have between each other. We had political processes. We had relational sociology processes. This was one of them. In Samoa, we had the Talanoa process. We had consultation. We had democracy. We had ways of Matai and Tula Fale speaking into spaces. That we had our stories. In Tokelau, we had Inati. And we, you know, the economy and the distribution of wealth and the way people participated in regards to the workforce, all of that existed. And so in regards to civic education, we had many different structures and systems that were in place for our people to achieve equity. And in Te Ao Māori, we had urungatanga, we had ways of education, we had ways of tōkana teina, te whare wānanga, pukingatanga. There were many ways that our peoples ensured that knowledge moved from generation to generation. And so we're quickly going through those four, but there's many different examples of how Māori and Pacifica engaged in civics. And I just want to take it back to that first the story, the song, and the pepeha, that actually to activate any of these, we needed to know who we are as individuals and how the world had influenced us to create that ha, the pepeha. From me and Mal, already just really appreciate the opportunity to share the journey we've had with Ace Aotearoa. Thank you to Annalise and the team, because a lot of this knowledge that we've gained over the years has come through our participation in Ace Aotearoa and the spaces they have created.
I agree. Yeah.
So just handing it back to our brother.
Cool. Me taki and Vinaka, Peter and Melissa, thanks for the session on civics education and helping reframe the narrative around what civics education means for all of us.